There's a strange kind of peace that settles in after midnight. We're the only one left. The building breathes differently. Every hum of the ventilation, every click of a cooling pipe becomes a part of the silence. You tell yourself it's a fortress. The doors are locked, the alarms are set. You are completely and safely alone. But that feeling of safety is built on one single assumption, that you were the one who locked the doors from the inside, and that no one else was already in here with you. Tonight, we have 3 stories from people who discover that assumption was wrong. There's a specific kind of silence you only find in a brand new building after dark. It's not just quiet. It's a clean, sterile silence, thick with the smell of fresh paint and new carpet glue. That was my world for 6 months, working the graveyard shift as a security guard at the newly constructed Sterling Tower, a 12-story monument to corporate ambition that was still 90% empty. My job was simple. Walk the floors, check the doors, and watch the monitors to make sure no one was trying to strip the place for copper wiring before the first tenants even moved in. It was the easiest money I'd ever made. My first patrol of the night was always the same. I'd start on the 12th floor and work my way down. The only light came from the green emergency signs and the occasional bare bulb hanging in an unfinished corridor. My footsteps were the only sound, echoing off the polished concrete and glass walls. It was a strange sight, walking through these massive, open-plan floors, seeing nothing but a forest of empty gray cubicles. Hundreds of them, all waiting for people who hadn't arrived yet. It felt like walking through a ghost ship, a place filled with the promise of noise and life, but for now, holding only me and the profound, bottomless quiet. After the sweep, I'd settle into the small security office in the lobby for the long haul. It was just me, a lukewarm cup of coffee, and a bank of 16 grainy black and white monitors. Most of them showed nothing but empty hallways and dark lobbies. Around 2 in the morning, my eyes were starting to glaze over when I saw it. On the screen labeled CM 4B, the northwest corner of the 4th floor, something moved. It was just a flicker, a smudge of motion at the edge of the frame. The 4th floor was supposed to be completely vacant. It was a raw space, not even built out with cubicles yet, just concrete pillars and sealed windows. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart starting a slow, heavy drumbeat. I told myself it was a moth on the lens, a trick of the low-resolution camera. I grabbed the mouse and clicked back through the last 30 seconds of footage. The timeline scrubbed backward, then I played it at half speed. And there it was. Not a bug, not a glitch. It was a shadow, tall and thin, slipping from the edge of the frame to disappear behind one of the thick concrete support pillars. It was undeniable. It was the shape of a person. Every protocol in the security manual screamed at me to call the police immediately. An unauthorized presence in a secured building is a code red. But my boss, a perpetually annoyed man named Henderson, had reamed me out a month earlier for calling in a false alarm over some teenagers on the roof. I could still hear his voice in my head, telling me to use my judgment before wasting police time. So, I made a different call. A stupid one. I decided I'd do a physical check first. I grabbed the heavy 4-cell mag light from a charger. It felt solid in my hand, more like a club than a flashlight. I told myself it was probably just a homeless person who'd found a way in before I locked up. I could handle that. The elevator ride up was the longest of my life. The car hummed, and the cables groaned with each floor we passed. 2, 3. I stood in the corner, my hand clenched around the flashlight, my thumb on the switch. My mind started playing tricks on me, picturing the doors sliding open to reveal someone standing there, waiting. I imagined a face in the dark, a weapon, a sudden rush. The dread was a physical thing, a cold weight in my stomach. When the elevator chimed and the doors for the fourth floor slid open, I was holding my breath. The air that hit me was cold and dead. It smelled of dust and curing concrete. The floor was a vast cavern of darkness, broken only by the faint green glow of the exit signs at either end. I stepped out, sweeping the beam of my flashlight across the empty space. The circle of light danced over the floor, illuminating nothing but dust motes hanging in the still air. I moved, methodically, checking behind each of the massive pillars, my footsteps the only sound. I walked the entire perimeter, my light cutting into every dark corner. Nothing. There was absolutely no one there. I felt a wave of relief, mixed with a creeping sense of embarrassment. I was about to radio down to the empty desk that the floor was clear, that I'd been spooked by a shadow. I turned to head back to the elevator, and that's when I heard it. From the far side of the floor, the area I had just finished checking, came a soft but distinct sound. A small, mechanical noise that sliced through the silence. It was the sound of a stapler, a sharp, deliberate click chunk. I froze. Every muscle in my body went rigid. The sound was so mundane, so completely out of place that it was more frightening than a scream would have been. I clicked off my flashlight, plunging the floor into near-total darkness. I used the pillars for cover, moving silently toward the source of the sound. My heart was a frantic hammer against my ribs. As I got closer, I peered around the edge of the last pillar, and I saw him. In the middle of this vast, empty concrete floor, there was a single desk and a chair. A desk that absolutely had not been there 5 minutes ago. A disheveled, thin man was sitting in the chair. He was calmly, methodically arranging a small set of office supplies on the desk. A stapler, a tape dispenser, a cup full of pens. He moved them in small increments, lining them up with perfect precision, as if it were the most important job in the world. I was hidden in the shadows, maybe 50 feet away, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My mind was screaming. Where did he come from? Where did the desk come from? I was about to reach for my radio when the man stopped what he was doing. He slowly lifted his head, but he didn't look in my direction. He looked up, his gaze fixed on a point on the ceiling just above him. He was staring directly into the lens of the security camera. A slow, unnerving smile spread across his face. And then he raised one hand and gave a small, deliberate wave. A cold shock went through me, so intense it felt like electricity. He knew. He knew he was being watched on the monitor. He knew I'd see him. He knew I would come up here. This wasn't a man who was hiding. He was putting on a show, and I had just walked right onto his stage. I didn't make a sound. I just started backing away, slowly, silently, never taking my eyes off him until I was back around the pillar. I didn't run. I walked to the elevator, my legs feeling like lead, and pressed the button. The wait for the car to arrive felt like an eternity. When the doors finally closed, sealing me inside, I pulled out my cell phone and dialed 911. The police arrived in minutes, 2 of them, their calm, professional demeanor a stark contrast to my shaking hands and frantic story. I led them up to the 4th floor. When the elevator doors opened this time, the floor was just as I'd found it initially, empty, dark, and silent. The man was gone, but the desk was still there, sitting right in the middle of the floor under the security camera. The stapler, the tape dispenser, and the cup of pens were still arranged in a perfectly straight line. The officers swept the entire building. They found nothing, no signs of forced entry. All the other doors and windows were secure. He had simply vanished. They filed a report, but I could see the look in their eyes. They thought I was either lying or losing my mind. But I know what I saw, and I know that man wasn't just some trespasser. He was an impossibility, an actor in a play that only he understood, leaving behind a single, perfectly arranged desk as proof that the show was real. There's a reason they build those late-night gas stations like fishbowls. The walls are all glass. The lights are bright enough to be seen from space. And you, the lone attendant, are the main exhibit. The idea is that nobody would try anything if they're that exposed. But they forget one thing about being in a fishbowl. You can't see out into the darkness nearly as well as the darkness can see in. For my 6 months working the graveyard shift at the stop-and-go off Route 9, I was the girl in the glass box, a brightly lit target in an ocean of pitch-black highway. The night it happened started like any other. The 3 a.m. lull had set in, that dead zone between the last of the late-night travelers and the first of the early-morning truckers. I was wiping down counters, listening to the hum of the refrigerators. That's when I saw the headlights. A car, an old, beat-up sedan the color of rust, pulled off the highway and rolled slowly to a stop at the furthest pump, the one half swallowed by the shadows at the edge of the lot. I waited for the driver to get out, for the familiar click of the gas cap. But nothing happened. The engine cut out, the headlights died, and the car just sat there, a dark shape in the gloom. Inside, I could just make out the silhouette of a single person in the driver's seat, perfectly still, facing me. 20 minutes passed. 20 minutes of me pretending to be busy, wiping the same counter over and over, my eyes flicking up to the car every few seconds. It didn't move. The person inside didn't move. A cold knot of anxiety was tightening in my stomach. Finally, the driver's side door creaked open. A man got out. He was tall and lanky, and he moved with a strange, unhurried gait as he walked toward the store. I felt a small bit of relief, thinking he was finally coming in to pay. But then he reached the entrance, and the automatic doors didn't slide open. I locked them at 1 a.m., just like I was supposed to. We used a pass-through drawer for any late-night transactions. He just stood there in front of the glass, waiting. He didn't wave or try to get my attention in any normal way. He just stared. His face was pale and expressionless, his eyes dark and empty. He looked right through me. I tried to ignore him, turning my back to restock the cigarette display, my hand starting to shake. And then I heard it. A tiny sound. Tap. I stopped. It came again. Tap. He was tapping on a glass door. It wasn't a knock. It was a light, delicate sound, like he was using just the tip of a single fingernail. Tap, tap, tap. I kept my back to him, my heart pounding against my ribs. I grabbed a box of candy bars and started arranging them on the shelf, the crinkling of the wrappers sounding deafeningly loud in the silence. But I couldn't drown out the sound from the door. It was rhythmic, incessant. Asterisk tap. 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 Asterisk, it was a patient sound, a sound that said it had all the time in the world. It started to get a little louder, a little more insistent, the sound of a fingernail clicking, clicking, clicking against the thick plate glass. It was the only sound in the universe. I chanced to look over my shoulder. He was still there, his face unchanged, his fingers still tapping. As my eyes met his, he stopped. He slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out a cell phone. I thought he was going to make a call, maybe to complain that the door was locked. But he didn't. He raised the phone, aimed it directly at me, and the world exploded in a silent, blinding white light. The flash was so bright, it left a big, green amoeba floating in my vision. He had taken my picture. That was it. That was the moment my fear turned into pure, unreasoning panic. I dropped the candy bars and scrambled for the back office, a tiny, windowless room with a desk and a phone. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my whole body trembling. I fumbled with my phone and called my manager, my voice a choked whisper as I told him what was happening. His response was a tired sigh. He told me it was probably just some drunk, that I should just stay in the back and wait for him to get bored and leave. Do not engage, he said. Do not call the police unless he actually breaks something. So I waited. I sat on the floor in the dark, my ear pressed to the door, listening. For a long time, all I could hear was the thumping of my own heart. Then, I realized something else. The tapping had stopped. The silence felt immense, heavy. I waited another 5 minutes, then 10. Nothing. Cautiously, I unlocked the office door and peeked out. The storefront was empty. I crept to the front windows and looked out into the lot. The beat-up sedan was gone. The relief was so overwhelming it almost made my knees buckle. He was gone. It was over. I let out a shaky breath and stepped out from behind the counter, trying to calm my racing pulse. I was just about to go back to the office when I heard it again. Asterisk tap. 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 Asterisk, my blood ran cold. The sound wasn't coming from the door. I looked around wildly, my eyes darting into every corner of the brightly lit store. It took me a second to place the direction. The sound was coming from above me. I looked up. Directly over the main counter was a small, grimy skylight, a 2-by-2-foot square of reinforced plastic looking up into the black sky. And in the middle of that square, I could see the faint, pale shape of a fingertip pressing down. Asterisk tap. 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 Asterisk, he was on the roof. The building had a low, flat roof, easily accessible from the dumpster around the back. He had climbed up and was now tapping on the skylight directly over my head. I didn't scream. I didn't have any air left in my lungs. My mind went blank with a kind of primal terror I'd never known. There was only one place left to go. The only room in the entire building without a window or a skylight. I ran to the back of the store, yanked open the heavy metal door of the walk-in cooler, and threw myself inside, pulling the thick door shut behind me. I fumbled for the lock and threw the bolt. I was plunged into absolute darkness and biting cold. The only sound was the loud hum of the cooling fan. Shivering uncontrollably from the cold and the fear, I pulled out my phone again, my fingers numb and clumsy, and I dialed 911. I huddled in the freezing dark, whispering my location to the dispatcher. After I hung up, I just waited. I could hear muffled scrapes and dragging sounds from the roof, and then the tapping started again. A dull, muted thudding that vibrated through the ceiling. Asterisk thud. 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 Asterisk, he was still up there. He knew where I was. I curled into a ball on the cold, metal floor, listening to that sound, a sound that promised it would never, ever stop. And then, cutting through the hum of the fan, I heard another sound, faint at first, then growing louder. It was the sound of sirens racing down the empty highway, coming for me. And as they got closer, the tapping from the roof finally stopped. In a hospital, especially on a night shift, you learn to categorize sounds. There's the rhythmic, gentle beep of a heart monitor, the soft hiss of an oxygen machine, the squeak of your own shoes on the linoleum. They become a kind of white noise, a lullaby of routine. The sounds you learn to fear are the ones that don't belong. The silences that are too deep. The footsteps that are too quiet. I was doing my 2 a.m. rounds on the 3rd floor, the long-term care wing. It was always the quietest part of the hospital. Most of my patients were elderly, deep in a sleep they wouldn't stir from until morning. I moved from room to room, a small flashlight in my hand, checking vitals, adjusting blankets. Everything was normal, everything was quiet, until I got to room 312. The door was slightly ajar, and in the dim light from the hallway, I saw a figure sitting in the visitor's chair. This was immediately strange. The patient in 312 was Eleanor Gable, an elderly woman who had been in a coma for the better part of a year. In all that time, she'd never had a single visitor. I pushed the door open a little further. The man sitting in the chair was well-dressed, in a dark suit, looking more like he'd come from a boardroom than a hospital vigil. He was just sitting there, hands folded in his lap, watching Mrs. Gable breathe. He looked up as I entered, and he gave me a polite, apologetic smile. He explained in a soft, calm voice that he was her grandson. He said he'd been traveling for work and had only just gotten into town, that he knew it was late, but he just had to see her. The explanation was so smooth, so plausible. And honestly, a part of me was happy for Mrs. Gable. It felt sad, her being alone all this time. So I smiled back, told him it was all right, and that I'd be back in an hour to check on her. I let it go. An hour later, I was back at the nurse's station, catching up on charting. I happened to glance up down the long, empty corridor, and I saw him. He wasn't in the room. He was standing at the far end of the hallway, near the double doors to the stairwell, almost 100 feet away. He was standing perfectly still, like a statue, and he was staring directly at me. There was no one else around. Just him, me, and the long, sterile hallway between us. The intensity of his gaze, even from that distance, made the hair on my arms stand up. I looked down at my chart, pretending to write something, my heart suddenly beating a little faster. I told myself I was being silly. I counted to 5, then looked up again. He was gone. The hallway was completely empty. A prickle of deep unease washed over me. I stood up and walked quietly down the hall to room 312. I had to check. I had to see. I pushed the door open, expecting the room to be empty. But it wasn't. He was back in the chair, in the exact same position as before, hands folded in his lap, watching Mrs. Gable. It was as if he had never moved at all. Something was very wrong. I went back to the nurse's station, my professional calm beginning to fray at the edges. I sat down at the computer and pulled up Eleanor Gable's file. I clicked through her personal information, my eyes scanning the page for her emergency contacts, her next of kin. And then I found it. A single, stark note from the social worker who had admitted her. It read, "Patient has no living family." The unease turned into a cold, heavy dread. He wasn't her grandson. He was a stranger who had lied his way into the room of a comatose woman in the middle of the night. I picked up the phone and dialed the extension for security. I kept my voice as level as I could, explaining that we had a visitor who was in a patient's room after hours and needed to be escorted out. I tried to make it sound routine, like it was a simple matter of policy. As I was on the phone, giving the security officer the room number, a light on the main console above the desk started flashing. It was the call light for room 312. A chill went down my entire spine. Mrs. Gable couldn't. Press that button. She hadn't moved in a year. He had pressed it. He was calling me. "You need to hurry," I said into the phone, my voice cracking. "Get up here now." I hung up and stood there for a moment, frozen. I had to go down there. I had to make sure my patient was okay. Every step I took down that hallway felt like I was wading through deep water. As I got closer to the room, I could hear a sound. It was a man's voice. He was speaking softly in a low murmur. But he wasn't speaking to Mrs. Gable. It sounded like a one-sided conversation, like he was answering questions that no one else was asking. I stopped just outside the door, peering through the narrow gap. What I saw made my breath catch in my throat. He was no longer in the chair. He was standing over Mrs. Gable's bed, his back to me. He was holding her pillow in his hands, holding it tightly, just above her face. He must have sensed me there. He didn't turn around, not at first. He just stopped talking. The silence was absolute. Then very slowly, he turned his head over his shoulder, his eyes locking with mine. He gave me a smile. It wasn't the polite, apologetic smile from before. This smile was wide and thin and deeply, horribly wrong. It was a smile of triumph, a smile that didn't belong on a human face. Just then, I heard the sound of heavy footsteps and loud voices from down the hall. The 2 security guards had arrived. Their presence, their noise, broke the spell. The man's smile vanished. He turned fully around, his expression now completely blank. He offered no resistance. He didn't say a word. As the guards entered the room, He simply held the pillow out to them, as if handing over a piece of lost property. Then he turned and walked out of the room between them, calm and silent, as if nothing at all had happened. The sun always rises. The shift always ends. But the feeling of being watched doesn't always go away. The most terrifying threats aren't the ones that break down the door. They're the ones that make you question the locks you trusted. The ones that make you realize the empty space around you wasn't truly empty at all. So the next time you find yourself working late, bathed in the lonely glow of a single light, listen. Listen past the hum of the machines. Listen to the silence. And pray you don't hear it answer back.